Yeah.
All right.
Okay.
So what I was saying was that with Paul was beloved, and so there was a question for me about how would Pat be received by the audience. And I think first of all, Pat did a great job. I think he chose to talk about the technology. He got concrete, and I think that's very much in line with our image. I think our voice at VMware, and so that really pleased me. The second thing I think that went very well is we talked about the software-defined data center, and this is I think the first time we've clearly articulated our strategy as a company. And it's always a little risky to tell customers what we think where we're moving. Software-defined data center is going to force change on them who are sitting there, force change on our partners. It requires us to change. And again, I saw heads nodding, people stayed, people were interested, they were taking notes, they were active, so I was happy with that. If I had to nitpick, I think some of the demos, it got a little long, and we tried to pack a lot of material in, and so by the last one, I did see people in I forget what the last demo was, but the gentleman was going a little quickly, and I think that at times we want to talk about all the goodness that we have, and we probably could do a little better job of maybe picking the 80% that really mattered.
But what is the real sense of the sentence software-defined data center? Because it's very nice to talk about that, but what it really is and what will be the strategic to distribute the product or to the end users?
There's really two parts to the software-defined data center. The first one is that we believe to truly automate the data center, you need to sever the link with hardware. Not that hardware goes away, but you want the functionality, the services that the hardware is delivering to be available as software. For example, right, we've got today a virtual switch. The virtual switch is identical to a physical switch. So that works at the individual server level, but how do you do that at the entire data center level? How do you have a logical network rather than just tapping into a physical network? How do you have a logical data store that's not mapped directly to one specific array one-to-one? How do you have the idea of, I just want some gold storage? And on the back end, that may be one array, two arrays. It could be today, an EMC Symmetrix and a Hitachi, and I may get rid of the Hitachi and buy a NetApp, and it doesn't matter. Everything happens the way. So the first step is making all the services available as software or virtualizing beyond just compute. And by the way, you want to do that not just at the cluster level, but across all the different clusters, so the entire data center level. Thus far, vSphere and VMware has been about primarily virtualizing compute and memory at the single cluster level. Mm-hmm. A cluster is an environment of machines that you can do a live migration within. The second step, and I think this becomes the much more important step, is the ability to automate based on policies across all these services and across the entire data center. To give you an example, we made our first major shift as a company when we went from being about ESX and just virtualizing one server to being able to virtualize multiple servers that were all connected together. So ESX was good, vMotion was great, but the value really came together when the distributed resource scheduler, DRS, came along. Because you could say, if utilization on this server ever goes above 70%, take a VM and move it over to the next server, right? So this was great. This has changed everything. Take that plus high availability at the cluster level, and administrators could go home at 8 o'clock knowing, no worries, my system is fully automated. But it was still at that cluster level. And so the problem that we've been having is it's still at that cluster level, and it requires me, anytime that I want to deploy a new workload, the compute's easy to deliver automatically, but the storage and the networking aren't. Availability isn't yet. And so what is the software-defined data center? It is about doing to the other data center services what we've already done with compute. So that answers, I hope, your first question. And your second, in terms of tangibly, it's about delivering those pieces: software-defined networking and security, software-defined storage, and then being able to automate them. with and deliver them as a virtual data center?
Because I think you need to work very close with the other provider, for example, MCA or Cisco, as you mentioned.
That's right.
That VMware will orchestrate the software pieces to integrate in other vendors' products. Or how do you work?
It's more the other way. So let me give an example of what we've done in the past, and this is what we're doing right now. Also, we came out. So first you had physical switches, right? Every rack had its switch. We created the virtual switch. Okay, not bad. But then you still had all these different virtual switches. Each of them had to be manually configured. So then we created a distributed switch, one switch that manages all of the other switches. Okay, that's good. But what about Cisco? Cisco had its own management tool to manage its physical switches. So we allowed Cisco to create their own distributed switch. So you could buy VMware's distributed switch, or you could buy the Cisco Nexus 1000V. That changed everything. Because the networking team could say, I can manage my virtual switches and my physical switches in one place. In the same way, it's not good enough for VMware just to offer a load balancer or an edge gateway device, app firewall. I mean, yes, we need to be able to offer a basic level of functionality ourselves. But really, we become a platform, really the key of us being a platform is that you don't just use ours, but you've got all the major vendors in the industry creating virtual versions of their physical appliances and allowing them to be plugged in. So they're actually utilizing our APIs so that we can plug in their options. So I'll have a choice of, do I want VMware's firewall or do I want somebody else's firewall? Do I want our load balancer or do I want F5's load balancer? Just as a perfect example. And so today we announced this new program where we're expanding the VMware Ready program exactly for that. So when someone goes in and wants to plug in, say, an F5 load balancer, we'll go through and we will certify and say, yes, that is ready for VMware technology. And so a customer now has choice. But you're right, one of the erroneous things in the press is people have gone out and said, software-defined networking. That means that VMware and Cisco are now at war. No, it doesn't. You know, it's like saying VMware virtualizes, VMware and IBM are at war. No, we're not. Yes, it changes things. So yes, in a virtualized world, IBM is going to sell different servers. Fewer small servers, but more big, high. In the same way, Cisco has to change. Not just because of VMware, but because the entire industry is shifting to a software-defined networking, where the data plane and the control plane are increasingly separating. Because the industry is shifting towards simplicity, central management. And right now having all of these intelligent switches everywhere, while it's been working for a while, I think there's a desire in the industry to say, we need to at the very least have centralized control.
This is a real open policy?
Does VMware have a real open policy?
Yeah, I mean, can other players go into this?
Yes, and I mean we as a company have always been about open standards rather than open source primarily. In most places, we believe it makes sense to be able to know that you own key parts of the platform. Therefore, you're able to make the investments, to hire the developers. There's a lot of work. Like if you look at vSphere, there's tremendous amount of work. We have thousands and thousands of engineers all around the world. It makes sense to control that deeply and not to have the entire world trying to recode vSphere. When you look at it, Xen, it's gone nowhere, right? Compare and contrast Xen with VMware. So there are parts where it makes sense to have a proprietary element, but that doesn't mean it can't be open. Right? VMware can own it and still make it open. If you look at thus far with virtualization, we make, the industry, we only make a small amount. If you look at the total pie, we only make a small amount of the total revenues. Storage vendors make $5 for every dollar we ever make on any sale. And management, there's a whole ecosystem, right? And so we try to have everything in our platform available via API. There are some places in which open source makes sense, and we've done that with things like Cloud Foundry. And recently today we entered the OpenStack Alliance, mainly because we've been major contributors with our two acquisitions, Nicira and Dynamic Ops.
Okay. So it doesn't mean that, for example, Cisco should build switches for Citrix, different from the switches that operate with VMware or.
Cisco's open to developing for any platform that it wants to. Citrix's platform has not had as much uptake as VMware, so it's harder for them to justify it. But as partners, yes, as partners, there is always some level of overlap. And so we recognize many of our partners develop for Hyper-V or Citrix, and that's okay. The market will decide which will be the dominant. For customers, it becomes very expensive to have more than one platform in their shop.
Sure. I don't understand what is Serengeti.
What is what?
Serengeti.
Serengeti. Serengeti is a set of technologies. It's a project, really, that we're doing within VMware about having Hadoop run better on VMware, run well on VMware. So there's it's a program to be able to deliver an automated Hadoop experience. So that rather than just simply take a VM and install Hadoop on it, right, it allows you to automatically scale up and out a Hadoop environment. But it is a research project right now. This is not a product that we've released.
Okay. You talk a lot about software as a service, infrastructure as a service, everything as a service in the cloud. Is it a real movement, especially for certain countries, for example, Latin America, that is different from Europe or USA? How is this going? How do you feel it's going, the trend to the cloud and to the?
You know, our general belief is that for most customers, virtualization is a prerequisite to cloud, right? So, you know, I was just recently in Peru, and I got asked this question, well, what does cloud mean for us? And the answer is as follows for me, which is, number one, there's an obvious one. One big difference today versus 10 years ago is if you're a Colombian company and you're looking to expand to Europe, you have a sales office. In the past, if you wanted IT there, you had to build a data center, right, or use colo. Now, you can, as you expand, first of all, from Colombia, you can use a cloud provider in Buenos Aires. You can have a cloud provider in Brazil, one in the US, in New York, in Australia. So expanding your business and making your business global is easier than ever. That's one tangible, but still, the question still is, if I'm a manufacturer in Colombia, how will cloud computing impact me? Short term, my first question always is, how virtualized are you? Because the gains of virtualization are so obvious and so large right now that our recommendation is, if you haven't virtualized, focus on that first. You know, almost anybody can do an ROI analysis to show that virtualization makes sense. You have a data center with 100, you're looking at 100 servers. Would you rather buy 100 servers or buy 5? Or 10, or whatever. 2 to 10, depending on your consolidation rate. It's so obvious, and it's not virtualization or cloud. To do cloud, you will need to be virtualized. With us or with somebody else, right? Without abstraction, cloud is cloud washing, right? The big difference between cloud and everything that's been sold in the past is that there's a level of abstraction that allows for simplification and greater automation. So the first step, and this is, you know, I say this is true for Latin America, it's true for Japan, for many companies, like I was recently in Peru and they are less than 30% virtualized. For most of my audience, my advice to them is, first, virtualize. Now, cloud also means something different. The other part of cloud is a much more highly automated environment. So the good news is a lot of what we're doing with the suite will mean that in a couple years, when they deploy storage, it'll be easier to manage. They will need fewer storage administrators. for example, in their environment. It'll be easier to set up networking. They won't need to rely on value-added resellers as much in terms of the day-to-day operations, which means that they can scale out more quickly, which means that they can focus their best people on architecture rather than ongoing maintenance. And so they'll be able to get an environment that's automated much, much more quickly in Latin America than they were in the US, because it's like moving, it's like someone who had never had a phone who gets a mobile phone. You can, in a sense, skip. In this case, it's not really skipping, but it's allowing you to move just much more quickly through that. Public cloud, from what I understand, is still a few years away in many Latin American countries. That you have fewer service providers based in Latin America. And so what I heard when in Latin America is that, for example, for compliance reasons, and also because of telecoms challenges, people are more likely in Latin America to first focus on the private cloud than the public cloud. But you know your country more than I do, so you should tell me if that's... I'm repeating things that I have heard when I was traveling there.
Okay. In Colombia, people really love to talk about every topic, but they just talk. They don't do everything they can. So the cloud is with a very small penetration at this moment.
Right.
Most people are waiting for others to take the decision to go to the cloud. And we just published a month ago a guide to the cloud. And but the conclusion is that we are still we are very young in cloud subjects, and we will wait until people really trust in the cloud. What are the main problem we solve? Integration of different sectors, the financial sector with commercial sector, they don't trust each other.
Right.
And security. And that is my next question.
Sure.
The main trend, the main challenge for VMware, for virtualization, for the cloud, is security. Especially because cloud now is based on mobility. It's one of the biggest components of the cloud. What about security?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. If cloud is about abstraction, pooling, and automation, it requires you to pool. And to pool means to have things that were physically securely isolated suddenly be brought together. That brings up tremendous fear, right? I'm not even talking about pooling one company's with another, Banco Santander's with another bank, right? I'm talking even within Banco Santander, just as an example, there's reticence to pooling two separate environments. So there are two parts to that. One part is true fundamental security. We need to move to logical isolation rather than physical isolation. So today we're at a point in which we're able to have multi-layered security with virtual firewalls. So have edge firewall around the edge of a data center, have application firewalls around applications. So true stateful firewalls. This has made a huge difference, right? And it's similar in many ways with virtualization. Initially, people didn't want to pool everything on one machine. And I think it was in 2007, the NSA, there was an article on the National Security Agency of the United States that finally said if they made an internal memorandum that says you can put VMs with different security clearances on one system as long as you do it this way. If you look at PCI is the credit card. It's for retail. It's about how you can store customer credit card numbers and names. Very important information. For a long time, said no to virtualization, and then as virtualization became more pervasive, they looked at it again and they started to say yes and issue some guidelines. And it takes some work. So the first part is the technology, and the technology is there. The part that needs to happen with cloud now, and I'm talking in terms of VMware's cloud specifically, is all the different people who have to certify that something is secure. They have to be convinced, they have to figure out they have to understand the new model, what holes need to be patched to be able to do it, how do you architect the system, right? And that's going to take a number of years. The public cloud is a whole other thing. And so what we see with the public cloud is that people are choosing their workloads very carefully. If you've got a biotech company that's doing protein folding, right? They cut it up into lots of little pieces. If you catch a piece, you know nothing. Doesn't matter, no problem. If you take Netflix or Zynga with games, no problem, right? So there are a set of use cases that are, but for public cloud to get above, right? Public web is another perfect example. It's public, so who cares? But for public cloud to gain share, it is going to need to be able to demonstrate from both a technology and a user experience that it can protect. And I think that's starting to happen. Certainly, if you look at VMware clouds, they're a lot more secure than the lowest common denominator clouds like Amazon. But you're absolutely right. I mean, it's going to take time, it's going to take years for people to gain comfort with that logical isolation technology.
And actually, we talk about a lot of kind of cloud, the prepaid cloud, the public cloud, the community cloud. But is the trend is to have just one cloud, a very big cloud where all information, all the user, everybody is using the cloud concept as a ground repository of the data and the processes.
I don't think it's about, honestly, I don't think it's moving towards one cloud. I think it's becoming one logical cloud being driven from many physical clouds. Here's what I mean by that. Me at VMware, my payroll information, I log into ADP, which is a SaaS provider. I write my reviews of my employees using another SaaS tool. My salespeople use a CRM tool from Salesforce.com, right? So you look at just, and even if I just take SaaS, very quickly there are actually 10 applications that I use at VMware, okay? On top of that, we do labs here at VMworld. The labs, we used to build these huge data centers here in Moscone. We don't do that anymore. What we do is that we use infrastructure as a service, public cloud, VMware vClouds, to be able to power that. And so my belief is that what we'll find is that, yes, things pool together in clouds, but you have many options. And you need to be able to operate seamlessly across them all. Let me give kind of a little example. In the old days, traveling salesmen had to stay with different people in every city. And what you did is you had a pooling of that demand into hotels, inns, a long, long time ago, right? But you had to have systems, and I'm going very ancient here, right? People in the United States would ride horses between different inns. But you had to have an infrastructure that made it, that regardless of where you went, you had similar infrastructure. You had the ability to leave a tired horse and get a fresh horse and move on. I may be stretching my analogy a little bit here. Maybe it's hotels with same Wi-Fi and VPN tunnels. But I think that we're likely to see that. You're going to get a pooling of demand to a level that's efficient, but you're going to get differentiation. So for a company, what's important is being able to have one view of a compliance across my private or private clouds, right? So I may have multiple. Public clouds I'm leveraging maybe for international expansion, SaaS systems, and be able to say, regardless of how my employee is accessing my data, via an application that is hitting my data center, via an application that's hitting an IaaS data center, via an application that's hitting a SaaS, it is secure every level of the place. It lives and is stored in one place or is replicated in multiple places. Catalogs are kept the same. Compliance is kept the same. This is the work our industry has to do over the next 5 to 10 years. And things like Horizon app and Horizon single sign-ons. I used to have to remember 8 passwords. That was fine when we had 4. But when you get to 10 apps, you can't do that. So when VMware implemented Horizon, I now log in once, and it logs me and shows me all of my apps and logs me into them all. That makes my life so much easier.
Gentlemen, we're at our time limit right now.
Okay.
So
Can I do the last question?
Sure.
Can't you give contradictory information against your boss opinions?
Can I, what?
I mean, this morning somebody asked about the
Oh, can I
idea
contradict
of,
my boss?
to sell VMware or to make a fusion or, with other companies. Paul or Pat said, no, we are not selling the company. There are a possibility of a fusion or
I see.
acquisition of a VMware.
Is VMware going to be acquired by other companies?
Yeah.
I mean, you can never say never. I know of no such plans. I know of no such plans. Now, as you know, we are a publicly traded company. We are owned 80 to 90%. You'd have to look it up by EMC. So first of all, EMC is a public company.
Yeah.
So EMC could be bought by somebody. That would be one way that someone would acquire VMware.
Mm-hmm.
Some company could approach EMC and ask them to buy VMware, right? That would be the other way of, EMC could choose if it wanted to. But these are all theoretical. I'm giving in the can, not the will. We have been, thus far, EMC at every time in its ownership of VMware has found it, A, beneficial to hold VMware, it's done very well for it, and B, to keep it separate. We are independent as a company, we operate independently.
How many assets have EMC? The 4%?
So EMC owns, where are we now? It's between 80 and 90%. It moves up and down. It's 80% now?
It's 80%.
Okay.
80%?
It has moved up and
Yeah.
down over time as we have buybacks, but it's the vast majority of our shares are owned. So for someone to buy us, they would either have to buy EMC or get EMC to choose to sell us. You could not accumulate enough shares in the open market to acquire VMware. That's not impossible, but I will honestly tell you I have no knowledge of any such effort out there in the market.
All right.
Okay, thank you very much.